I took $100 out of his wallet while he was sleeping, and I pushed my pickup truck out of the driveway, and I drove to Florida with $100. So I'm working in this lab. I'm unqualified, but I'm excelling. But if you have an urge to do something, fear is not a good enough reason not to do something.
Change isn't just coming, it's here, faster and more intense than ever. How will you adapt when technology shifts the ground beneath our feet? I'm David.
And I'm his brother Phil. And this is Whiplash Nation, where we explore the stories of people who've mastered the art of adaptation.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Whiplash Nation, where we talk about people who flip the scripts on their careers, sometimes by choice, sometimes they maybe needed a little bit of a shove. I'm Dave.
And I'm Phil. I know I definitely need a shove once in a while. And full disclosure, today's show is about Justin Allen. Justin is a good friend of mine, and we've collaborated on many, many things.
Yeah, Phil, you go way back with Justin, all the way back to the What Weekly days, which, for those of you who don't know, if you're not from Baltimore, if you did anything artistic, anything music, anything creative, or anything just plain out weird in the city of Baltimore for about 10 years, What Weekly covered it as an online blog and publication. And Phil, you probably took a picture of it.
And Justin and his wife, Brooke, were at the center of What Weekly magazine. He's one of those guys that had about 27 careers, from heavy metal musician to patent inventor to military security to running a creative agency. But somehow, no matter where he goes, he always ends up in the middle of something crazy.
Yeah, and getting out of it too.
Yeah.
I love that story. We always talk about like where you start in your career, and he started off as a metal musician. He took his band down to Florida. They lost their money. They lost their truck. They had to live in a hotel off of snacks and ramen noodles. And somehow he ended getting through that into a high-paying but dangerous career up in the sky.
Yeah, and I got to say, Dave, that sounds a little bit more like a country song than a metal song.
But that's the thing about Justin, and really kind of fits within the theme of our show and the theme of this podcast, is no matter what monkey wrench or what change was thrown at him, he was able to adapt to that change and still succeed.
Yeah, and you'll hear a lot about change and a lot about risk taking, and how sometimes things don't go as planned, and that can be a good thing.
So stick around. You're going to hear a lot about wild career pivots, near-death experiences on a cell tower 150 feet up in the air, and some of the wildest job interviews you'll ever hear.
Well, let's go.
Let's do it.
Hey, Justin. Welcome to Whiplash Nation. It's great to see you.
How's it going, fellas?
It's going great.
Going great. We're grateful to have you here.
You have such an interesting story. You were started off as a rock band. You've been on towers. You've been a security expert. You've been in medtech. You've run events. You've done agencies. There's probably 6 other things I'm not even aware of. If we look back in your career, I wanted to start with the story of how you were going to become a metal rock musician. Like how you were going to become the next. I'm trying to think of some 80s band. I don't know how long ago this was. Was it Rat?
It's probably more along the lines of like death metal, but not quite as graphic. Where I grew up, kind of a dark place, and a lot of that was reflected in the music that came out. I kind of grew up in a place where, a lot of my friends from that era are no longer with us. It was that kind of place in Clarksville, Tennessee. So that was reflected back in the music that kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And at a certain point, we were running out of venues to play because the crowds that we were drawing were rowdier and rowdier. Playing a venue that was only, it was 21 and over, and most of our crowd couldn't get in. And the other venue that we used to play wouldn't have us back. The cops raided while we were there. And we thought to ourselves, we can't even really play around here that much. Got to get out of here. So we decided to move to Tampa. It was the nexus for a lot of heavy metal or death metal at the time and hardcore music. So we hatched a plan that we were going to raise up some money. I was going to come up with some cash. My dad found me a job building carports for people in their driveways. I decided that I just couldn't stay. So I took $100 out of his wallet while he was sleeping, and I pushed my pickup truck out of the driveway, and I drove to Florida with $100.
Are you sure this is a metal story? This isn't a country story? It's like a perfect song, it's perfect setup for a country song.
So I get down there now with like $100 minus whatever gas and snacks I'm buying from gas station. I bought a case of beans, and that's what I lived off of for that time.
Yep.
And then we worked day labor together, digging ditches, just labor.
Whatever. Yeah, whatever you could do.
Yeah. While we were living in this hotel room for 6 months, it was awful. We often would, come into the room and play find the smell. What is creating that smell,
What is rotting underneath?
Yeah. Waiting for the rest of the band to show up. Somewhere during that time, I met a guy walking down the hallway, and it's like, hey, do you want to smoke some weed? No, total cop vibes. I don't have any weed. And he's like, well, come smoke some of mine. I was like, oh, okay, I'll smoke some of yours. So figured out he was pretty cool. And that led to me meeting the whole crew that was there that was working, and they were building cell phone towers and installing cell phone antennas in and around Florida at the time. They offered me a job.
And was this going to be a choice between staying in music and moving into this other position, or were you going to try to keep both going at the same time?
The band situation was deteriorating quickly.
Things weren't stable.
They were unstable. The job that I was taking was paying for my apartment. They were giving me per diem.
Yep.
They were giving me $50,000 a year base salary. That was a lot of money for a young, I was 20.
Yeah.
We worked 6-7 days a week and 10, 12-hour days, mind you. That kind of changed my whole trajectory. And the job interview was like, hey, climb that tower. Can you climb that tower?
Without getting scared. How tall was the tower? Like, what was the first
180? It was 180 feet.
And did they did they hand you like a flimsy rope? They say, hey, take this, strap this around you and go up?
They have safety. The towers have a safety cable that goes up, and you wear a harness and you strap into the cable.
Yep. So if you don't die, you get the job. So now you got the right opportunity in Florida, you got per diem, and you could just see that the social environment you were in was a dead end. Take us to California. What happened on the way out to California?
So we started off, it's great. We're bouncing around Florida. We're building towers. I'm learning about antenna installation. Actually, another friend of mine from Clarksville came in. He's also no longer with us. He'd saved my life at one point. We were in the Everglades, and we were taking down a tower in the Everglades. So it had guy wires that held it in place. We get down to the last 80 feet and the last set of guy wires, and they take off the first one, and we go, whoa. They take off the second one. We're like, whoa.
Are you guys strapped in to the tower at this point?
Yeah, we're strapped to the tower. We're picking points in the swamp to dive off in case this thing collapses. And they're like, Eddie, go to the truck and get something to cut it, sawzall, whatever. He goes to the truck and he walks around the tower, and he realizes the tower is leaning and all of the tension's on that one cable. And he was like, get down, everybody down. So Eddie saved my life that day. Eddie quit because it sucked. I go to Washington to take his place, and it was...
It's like winter, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. It's cold. I'm using these fingerless gloves so I can feel where I'm climbing.
Yep.
I get frostbite in the first few hours because we were up on the tower until dark. Wow. Every time the crane would bring another section up, the mud would just rain down on us. And there's no ladder, so you have to take your spud wrench, which is like a spike, and you put it into the hole above you, and you pull yourself up, and that's how you get up the tower. I got frostbite 2/3 of the way up. They sent me up new gloves, told me to keep going. It was somewhere in this time period that I realized that this is not
a long-term career
thing.
It's dark. You can't feel your fingers anymore, and they say, we're just sending you new gloves. How do you handle that type of pressure?
There's no alternative, right? I mean, the alternative is you quit. I don't know how many thousands of dollars a day to rent the crane. There's a lot of money wrapped up in it. Once you commit to doing it, you have to see it through. If you weren't prepared to do what needed to get done, then don't show up to the work site and act like you are.
That was the attitude? That was the prevailing attitude. Is that what you're saying?
That's the way that I operate. I'm more mellow now, for sure. Yeah, it was hardcore. And At that time, I'd met a girl who was in Maryland, and we had become close. And I would go visit sometimes when I had downtime. And then work life was, hey, we're going to drop you into this metropolitan area. You're not going to know anybody. You're going to go stay at this shitty hotel. Another time that we were doing a tower in Florida, we had twin twisters start up right around us. I could see the funnel cloud from the top of the tower. The other guys had a penchant for drugs that I wasn't comfortable with, and I was living with them. You know, their addiction, they're addicts. This is not going where it needs to go. I decided I'm going to give it a go with this girl who lived in Maryland. Ended up moving to Baltimore. And in that time frame, I found a job that I wasn't qualified for. In the early 2000s, the tech bubble was happening and everybody thought that they were going to be millionaires and get stock options. So nobody who's qualified for the job would take the job that I was going for because the salary was too low. Being a college dropout, I thought it was really cool. It was a government contractor, and they did RF research and development, some cutting edge stuff. So
RF being like radio frequency or
radio
what?
frequency, antenna stuff. So I worked on the antennas, doing microwave relays, cabling, transitioned into this more sophisticated laboratory.
Yeah.
And they did doing a lot of work that was then deployed around the world on behalf of,
Uncle Sam.
unnamed government agencies. So I'm working in this lab. I'm unqualified to be there, but I'm excelling in the things that we're doing. But they're like, you really need to go back to school if you want to have a career in this field.
Yeah.
You need to go back to school.
What type of degrees were you supposed to have that you didn't have?
Electrical engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started going back to community college to get some credits, this, that, and the other. Never materialized. This company had a legacy of field engineering, would have jobs pop up in Antarctica and Middle East. To me, it was just an adventure. I took the one to Saudi Arabia. They gave us ID cards. And when I got my ID card, it said GS-13 on it. And having been a military brat, I knew GS-13 was a really high rank. Well, it was just a mistake. But either way, they didn't fix it.
You don't have an electrical engineering background.
Yeah.
You have a tower background, but you're not the systems of the tower. You are the installation of the tower.
Yeah. And I'm getting a GS rating that's equivalent to a lieutenant colonel.
Yep.
So
when you show up on a base, no one has to know that you're not a lieutenant colonel.
I showed my ID card to a young gate guard one time, and he looked at me. Oh, how did you get that? You're so young. And I was like, just off the top of the dome, I was like, it's an equivalency of knowledge.
You throw in like a sir in there, so like, oh yeah, sir. What's the coolest trip that you do?
So we leave JFK on September the 8th, 2001.
Yep.
Like 3 days before 9/11.
What could happen?
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
I remember seeing the Twin Towers as we were flying out. Wow, those are the biggest things I've ever seen from an airplane. I'm going to come back and I'm going to visit those. And it was the last flight that TWA had going into Riyadh. We wake up in the morning and it's a sandstorm. I mean, it's just a whiteout. So we're basically hunkered down. And on the 11th, I come into the common room and I see a few guys sitting around watching the TV, the smoke coming out of the tower. Immediately, my first thought was like, what movie is this? No, it's not a movie. It's like an airplane flew into the tower. And then we see the second one. We watch it real time. Whoa, boom.
Yep.
And we were just like, what just happened?
Let's talk a little bit about the jobs that you had to do in the airbase there.
Yeah. So I was the certified climber. I was there in case something needed to be climbed.
They're like, that guy's been up towers before. Let's send him over there to go up towers over here.
I was actually the only guy who had any reasonable amount of field experience. We set up zone security sensors. There was a camera associated with it that would determine whether or not somebody needed to go out and check and see what was going on. The Bedouins were considered like holy people, and they could go through the base whenever they wanted to. They would have these magnesium flares set up on the Constantine wire across the thing, and the Bedouins would come up and they would set it off. They would cut the Constantine wire and they would drive their caravans through the base. Mind you, this was where the biggest ammo dump in the world was at the time. I got pictures of me hanging out with Patriot missiles and whatnot, 5,000-pound bombs. We went home and they offered to send me back out again. I didn't want to go.
Were you there extra time for security reasons because of 9/11?
I think it was 3 months. We went home and they offered to send me back out again. I didn't want to go. I didn't agree with the way that they operated. 3 days after 9/11, we were given site survey plans for Baghdad. We didn't invade until 2003, But they sent us plans and are like, how would you secure this? How would you secure that? They don't even really know anything.
Yeah.
There's no investigation, but the powers that be are like, hey, this is a good opportunity to go into Baghdad. That was part of it. There was a lot of things I didn't agree with that went against my personal values. So I didn't go back. I sacrificed a lot of money not to go back. It was very lucrative. A lot of people were asking the right kinds of questions. Really, my concern was more about troops coming from a military background, my dad being in the military and my brother going over there, who was actually at one of the bases after I left. And I was just sort of had some curiosity around taxpayers and like what we're paying, what we're spending our money on. That stuff started to bubble up for me, and the powers that be were rebidding the contract that I was on. And they came to me one day and said, your job went away. Here's some money. Shut the fuck up and go away. I was like, okay, fine. Whatever. I'm not going to be able to fight this. Immediately, I didn't know what to do. I took up carpentry. I used to be a cabinet builder. Started doing concert work, like audio, and I hosted a poetry night for $50 a week to make ends meet. And then I transitioned into being a barista for a few months. And then I'll put my resume out there and see what pops up. Some things popped up, and one of those things was a startup that was based out of Hopkins. One of the founders was one of the inventors of the clinical MRI machine, and the whole thing was about making implantable surgical devices that were compatible with MRI environments. My background in RF at that lab was a very unique set of skills, and they didn't have a lot of money to spend. I'm always the cheap guy.
Are you saying that you're the Liam Neeson of RF? You have a very particular set of skills?
A very particular set of skills. That's a good way to put it. They brought me in. One of the projects they had me working on was developing an implantable surgical device, a pacing lead. So MRI environments pulse RF the same way that an antenna does. Think of pacemakers for your heart. They have long leads. They basically couple like an antenna. Our job was to make it stealth, like a stealth bomber. But you have to do it in a very small space without any extra components, with a device that's going to be inundated by fluids over time. And the application that we were working on was the most difficult application for Parkinson's patients who use a pacing lead into their subthalamic nucleus, which is a very small area. I developed a design that ended up being sold to a larger company. And
again, you don't have an electrical engineering degree,
no,
an industrial design degree, a medical degree.
Mm-hmm.
You just crafted. You had spent so much time working in the field on RF tech, working in the lab for RF tech. So you're able to apply what you knew in this one role in a completely different field.
I learned a lot on the job. I applied some of the things that I knew from the lab, and then I did experiments all day, every day, until we figured out something that worked. I was building on other people's work too, so it wasn't just me. It was certainly a collaboration, but yeah, it was published in the Journal of Medical Physics. So yeah.
It's amazing.
So that got your name onto the patent. There's a bunch of other names. But,
correct.
Yeah.
Right. Paul Bottomley, head of the imaging research lab at Johns Hopkins. He was the founder of the company who basically pioneered a lot of this stuff. Yep. And Parag Karmakar, who was the guy who hired me directly. Bill Edelstein, who was the other guy who, along with Paul Bottomley, developed the first clinical MRI machine.
How do you get from there to a digital magazine?
Well, they also told me that I needed to go back to school, and I did. I went back to community college again. But then I met Brooke, my wife, and she was very much determined to start her own business. There was an energy at that time, too, around starting businesses. Brooke was very determined to start her own business. She had a client that was a domainer. And these domainers at the time, in the 90s, figured out a glitch in the matrix where they realized that they got a domain and they parked it and they did something with it. They could make a lot of money. She introduced me to that domaining business. She set up a meeting with us, with two domainers in New York at a domain conference. So we go to New York City and we're hanging out with guys.
What year was this? Just so we can.
2009 or 10. So we go up there and they were like rock guys. Like they were from New York, played at CBGB's. After that scene died, they went to LA. They played at the Whiskey, and they never made it.
There's a common thread in tech and startups. Everyone's into music. There's always a musician story behind everyone. So that's interesting.
There's some people that have the guitar on the wall because they did really good with the startup, but they can't play it. and
Yeah.
other people that have the guitar on the wall that can actually play it.
Right. So we go up there, we hang out with them for the night, we get super inspired, we come back, we're like, what could we do that's not going to cost us any money? We didn't have any money. Brooke goes out on her own and starts a one-woman consultancy, marketing and PR. That's what she was doing for an agency out of DC. I help her where she needs help. I come to meetings so she looks like she has a team, and I'm assisting her with some small tasks around that. We landed on the idea of starting an online magazine. So we can start an online magazine based off of some other models that we had seen. And actually, at first, it was only supposed to be email. It looked like it was low effort. That was possible. Create a lot of leverage and low effort. So then we started an online magazine, mostly email with just a little bit of stuff on the website, until we realized that our emails were getting so long that they were getting cut off when we were sending them because we were getting so much content. One of the things that Brooke and I have in common, we're both nonconformists. We're both highly skeptical of the media. Neither one of us wanted to be into marketing. We're really not fans of marketing.
Yep.
We both liked certain media, but we didn't like the mainstream. We didn't like big money influence. So the magazine, we were trying to fill a need in Baltimore to highlight what was good about the city, because everything that came out in the media was sort of skewed and filtered through the lens of The Wire and negative news. And even the way that the city reported on itself was overtly negative. Meanwhile, in the center of the city, there's this amazing creative core, an amazing community of people coming together to do really phenomenal things, and a great spirit and soul in the center of the city that was mostly overlooked. And it wasn't being presented in a way that we felt like could help it reach its full potential. So we don't want to do hard journalism about the mayor and the terrible things that are happening in this neighborhood. That's what the newspaper is doing. That's what everybody else is doing. You guys have got that handled. Great. Do that. We're going to do this, and we're just going to focus on this. What we realized over time was that there's no money in micro publishing. It was hyper-local publishing. There was a ton of those kinds of magazines that popped up in every city, and most of them have gone away except in the major markets. And those ones in the major markets are usually propped up by a larger media conglomerate at this point. But there was a zeitgeist. The bandwidth on the internet opened up and allowed us to publish larger pictures. And it was about the time that DSLRs really took off. And this was not by design at all. It was just the right time. This is before Instagram. And we were, with the help of Phil and other amazing photographers, we were the showcase for the amazing things happening in the city with these vibrant, amazing photographs that sort of like encapsulated. There was also some good videographers that came to the fore, like Justin Nethercutt, who did a series on graffiti artists. But the bread and butter really was the photographs and some of the artist profiles and the stories that we did to lift up people and give them the spotlight. And what ended up happening was that didn't make us any money. All of the contributors, for the most part, were volunteers. We were actually losing money on it for the most part, but what it did was it drove people to Brooks' marketing consultancy.
So it got attention. There was traffic. There was an audience. You just weren't able to monetize it yet, but that audience gave you a name.
Right. Advertising is not a viable model for local publications. More than 90% of all traffic goes to social sites now.
Yep.
Right. And then that leaves all the other sites crumbs to fight over. This is why when you go to most websites that are media focused publishing websites, you're inundated with ads that make the user experience, insufferable.
Horrific.
It's awful. Right.
It's
because the social media guys have won the race.
Yep.
The small media guys really can't compete. And you can't not on an advertising model.
So you have this media publication. The audience is great. The traffic is great. It's differentiated from everything, but you're not making any money.
I was at the startup. My design had been licensed, and I felt in my bones that they were going to lay me off at some point because I wasn't going to get the electrical engineering degree. I was a lab rat. It was a sweet gig. It was great. But I knew it was going to come to an end, and I actually stopped playing music and to focus on What Weekly, the magazine. I was a magazine publisher, not a marketer. And actually quit my last band to focus on What Weekly. So I started helping Brooke. I started using that time to work on the magazine and really get it where it needed to go.
So what was the transition between that and now there's the agency side of the business?
So when they finally laid me off, I went through all of my contacts that I had amassed the previous months. Brooke knew that was coming too. She says, come work with me. She says, come work with me and we can grow this business. I was like, okay, I'll do that. But I also needed to earn a living. So I started sending out emails and I started getting back leads and immediately got a website and branding gig. I don't think we'd ever done a brand besides What Weekly or built a website at that point. But we sold it and it ended up being an amazing logo. The first one that we put out, one of the people on the board said, this is obviously inspired by God. I was like, great. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I'll take that.
And then how did you go? But at some point you decided to start this really cool event in Baltimore. How do we go from that to the event?
To the Light City.
So What Weekly, it opened up a lot of doors for us. We got invited into discussions about economic development, and the powers that be saw that we had the attention of an audience that they wanted as well.
Yeah.
It was like the young millennials and the startup scene. And we were having a great time. I mean, Phil was there. It was a blast. It was a magical time of life.
Yep.
We met Andy Rubin. So Andy Rubin,
he had Cyclops Book, which were also on North Avenue.
He also has a record label, which is not a slouch of a record label. The artist that he had at the time had been featured in Time magazine as an up-and-comer. We were at Joe Squared for the Drunken Spelling Bee, and Andy won, and I came in second. And I was like, son of a bitch. So I go and I buy him a drink, and we're chatting. And he has this T-shirt on. It's a friend of mine's band from North Carolina, random, right? He's like, you got to come to South by Southwest. And then Brooke had some friends who were going to South by Southwest, and she had some friends in Austin, and somebody else was going. So we get in the car, no reservations, no tickets, no nothing. And we drive 2 days to Austin. And on our way in, we're using the Hotel Tonight app. We find a room and we're hanging out with Andy, and we're just having like all of this synchronicity. If you've ever been to South by Southwest, it's just bar after bar after venue after venue after bar after venue of live music happening everywhere, even the coffee shops and the bookstores, and everything is just music, music, music. Everywhere you go, just music. This friend of Brooks connected her with a startup from Austin. We're going to meet this guy. When we walk in, there is my friend from North Carolina's band that I saw on Andy Rubin's T-shirt at the Drunken Spelling Bee. What are you guys doing here? What are you doing here? It's like, we're getting ready to play. Holy shit, no way. So it was like that the whole time that we were there. Synchronicity and magic and just good times. And we just met a ton of people, and we're just like, man, if we could just create this kind of magic in Baltimore, how do we do that? How do we create magic in Baltimore, on this scale? Because South by Southwest was a sleepy little music festival just 20 years earlier. If we could do something like that year after year, we could really have something. So we go back to Baltimore. It turns out other people had the same ideas. Like, we're going to do a South by Southwest for Baltimore, right?
Yep.
And Brooke and I came to the conclusion that you couldn't do a music festival. There's tons of music festivals. South by already has that. First, we were like, well, what if we do a performing arts thing? We had recently been to Sleep No More in New York, and also the Transmodern Festival. So there were these cool performing arts things happening. And we were like, what if we could just turn Baltimore City into a performing arts festival? Like, you come and there's immersive theaters things that you go to and all that. What ended up happening is we were on a road trip, and I had seen these images of the Sydney Opera House being lit up. But Brooke had a friend in Australia who was at the same festival, and she was seeing his photos. He was a photographer on screen. And she turns to me and she says, this light festival, what is this? I was like, yeah, I saw that too. She got super excited, and she's like, this should be the festival. And I was like, yeah, it should totally be the festival. Well, how do we do it?
So fast forward, how big did the festival become?
Cut to the chase. We ended up hiring the creative director of the Sydney Festival. I think it might be the largest light festival in the world. It's called Vivid Sydney. Ignatius Jones. And he was also the creative director of the Sydney Olympics. We got a grant from the Able Foundation to hire him to do a feasibility study. They loved the idea. Yep. And then the weird thing is, we didn't realize this going into it, but the year that we were proposing to do it was the 200th anniversary of BG&E lighting up Baltimore streets with gas street lamps. They were the first one in the States to do it. This coincidence, the synchronicity of these two things coming together, what are the odds? The festival in year one cost $4 million. It ended up being a collaboration of over 500 people. And year one, I think $38 million worth of economic impact into the city. It generated over 1 billion impressions worldwide.
From a pure idea, you went from that to an event that generated 1 billion impressions and brought in $38 million. Amazing. You can go from an idea of nothing to something that's sort of impactful and meaningful. Let's talk about, what are you doing now?
I kind of like to think of us as like a special forces marketing team. You know, people come to us and they have a challenge that requires a different perspective. We're much more focused on projects that really light us up and create value in our lives as well. So we're not on the rat wheel trying to grow the biggest agency in the world. We're trying to do meaningful work. It doesn't matter what level they're at, but I like to work with people who their organization is giving them agency to take a risk, to try something new.
And do something that's actually functioning for the business.
Right. A lot of these enterprise companies, they're driving all of these metrics up through the roof, but they can't correlate it back to anything that actually means something.
Yeah.
That's a good point here. You talked about people not being able to take risks. That's really interesting, that it doesn't matter how big they are. It's great to be around people with the energy that if you have an idea, you're not throttled back by a bunch of political BS. Reflecting on your career, what do you think is the most important lesson about risk taking that you've learned?
The thing that generally holds people back, and this is why I really believe in meditation being really important for everybody.
Yep.
The thing that holds people back is their imaginary barriers, like fear being one of those barriers. It's just, it's a cacophony of electrical impulses and hormones and neurostimulators that's creating this anxiety about whatever it is you're not doing. I always felt like I would much rather have taken the risk and failed than not have tried at all. And this is what I tell my kids. Failure is a part of success. We didn't talk about a lot of the things that didn't go right in this interview. Maybe it all went right. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, when we left Light City, we had a disagreement with other collaborators that wasn't pretty. We didn't leave the way that we wanted to leave. But a couple of years later, COVID happened and the whole thing fell apart. And we got out at kind of a good spot. So
what seemed like a disaster at the time.
Right. So, that ability to moderate your thoughts and to realize the difference that you're not your thoughts. Fear is terrible because you're sitting here trying to solve this problem. Your mind is not really capable of solving a lot of these problems. It's not in the thinking where problems are solved. It's in the doing. So if you're not doing something because you've got all of these like racing thoughts in your head that this is going to be terrible, you got to shut that up. Because your mind is trying to protect you from whatever terrible thing that might happen, but it's also stopping you from fully experiencing your potential. So I would say that, when it comes to taking risks, ask yourself, how bad can failure be? People, you see people all the time, they go bankrupt, people have their houses blown up and they come back from things, or these people, especially these hurricanes, and people are flooding their houses and they pick themselves back up again. I think that we're more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. But generally speaking, I look at somebody else and if I see somebody else doing something, I'm confident that I can do it. Now, I'm 47 years old. I can't look at NBA players and be confident that I'm going to be in the NBA. But, given that within reason, when another person can do, you can do.
Is this the lesson that you would tell your younger self? Like, hey, listen, this is what I've learned about risk. Was that it? Or is there anything else?
I would tell people, take risks.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to take risks. If your fear is stopping you from taking risks, figure out how to get over that. Meditation is a great way to get control of your mind. Take risks.
That's what I was going to ask next. Like, if fear is the blocker, here are 2 or 3 things you can do. So meditation is one of them. Is there anything else that someone could do to get over the fear?
Do you want to spend the rest of your life wondering what if?
Yeah.
To me, that just seems like the worst fate. Having not tried at all.
Yep.
You only get one. From my perspective, and maybe there's another life or whatever, but from where I sit now, this is the one time through this. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And it's an
Yep.
amazing gift that we've been given to be able to experience life and everything that I want to experience and feel all of it. That's why I had kids. I spent a lot of time in my 30s doing things that, single people do. And then I had kids. What is that relationship like? And now I'm hitting the gym 4 or 5 days a week because I want to see where they're going to go. I want to be around as long as I can. So this trip that we're on in life, it's a one-shot deal. So I'm leaving it all on the field. Something else comes to mind.
What's that?
Sure.
This whole framework of how things are supposed to be and what you're supposed to do, it's all just a story. It's all just somebody else's framework. It's an illusion. You are free to break the mold whenever you feel like it. You don't have to do what people tell you to do. As I say that, I realize that that's how my daughter is naturally, and it gives me hope for her. She's an amazing, bright, young lady, but it's not real.
It's the whole thing. Like, people in college, like, it's a construct.
Yeah,
you're right. There's a story out there that at some point someone said, everyone has to go to college. For example, you have to get to college. And at some point there was truth in it because of the different economics, maybe in the 50s or the 60s. And when the college education was, like when I went to school, it cost me $9,000 a year. I came out with a $99 a month student loan. I mean, it was just a different dynamic. But now you can go for a degree and now you're $500,000 in debt and wasted 4 years that you could have been applying at something else.
Right.
Why? Because it was a story that someone told. And the people that are telling it now, it's when you say that, in my mind, I was just thinking about this the other day. When people forget why they're telling the story in the first place, that story becomes a trap.
Right.
Essentially, right? Because you don't have to go to college, And I've been telling my kids, there's so many things that you can do that do not require a 4-year degree. There's all sorts of trades, but even in programming, you don't need a 4-year degree to be a programmer. And with AI, that's going to change even more. But you can take one of these 14-week, 6-month immersions, and you could actually be working on something, maybe making money, starting your own business.
I would almost say that with the advent of AI, following any aspect of that story and holding on to any of that story is potentially a dangerous thing to do. Because we use AI to draft legal documents. We use AI to understand how to manage finances. People, if you're not using it to a deep degree, we use it for so many different things that replacing the need for these other things. And it's very early. I'm preparing my kids for it. Like, I think entrepreneurship is a safe space because you take the set of circumstances that are out there and you figure out how to do something with it, and not necessarily like, here's this thing that you go do, and now you do this, and now you do that, and now you do this, and now you do that.
It's the story. We could have done this whole podcast on the story because it's the story of our parents that are trapping us today. And it's
like a legacy trauma. A lot of people are in that legacy trauma where they're still happening so quickly that it's hard for many people to pivot.
Right. If you think about it, it's because they don't stop and ask the question why. Like, I'm going to go to college. I have to go to a good school. I have this conversation with my kids and I say, I will pay for your degree, but it has to be STEM. You can't go for an art degree. And they're like, I'm an artist. I'm like, listen, so am I. But I'm going to tell you, $400,000 worth of debt will make a prison for you that you'll never be able to do your art because you're going to have to be able to pay for that $400,000 of debt. So I'm much be happier if you said, I'm going to be an artist and I'm not going to go to school and I'm going to go do theater or I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do.
Follow that path.
Follow that path. Don't follow the story.
Right.
Because you have to ask, why do you need the 4-year degree? Just keep asking why. When I was first in business, there was a mentor that was always like, whatever situation you get in, just ask why 6 times. Just to keep thinking about why they're doing something. So they're not just doing it because.
Right.
And so this goes back to fear. And when you're stuck in fear, maybe you won't take the risk. And then you fall back on the story. You were trained when you were younger. I have to have a 4-year degree. Well, why? Why do you have to have a 4-year degree?
You don't.
Look at all these startup founders that never graduated college. Right? There's a big number of them that never did.
I'm kind of in a situation now where I've got all of this experience and evidence of credibility around a certain thing. It wasn't in the vein of what I was passionate about earlier. So I have to try to fit in this stuff and marry it with my values and my passions and try to bring it all together. Tell my kids, early, like really dig into your passions. My mistake was that I thought a music career was a party. And that's why I never really got very far down that road, is because I did great at partying.
Partying, like you have a degree in a master's in, puddling.
Yeah, I had a master's in a bunch of things. When you talk about kids, like giving them that perspective and that understanding, is like, yes, you can follow your passion. It could look like a whole bunch of different things. If you try to like create some expectation of what it's going to be like when you get there, it's probably not going to be that.
Yeah.
But the things that you speak into being, the reason why Light City happened is because we told people it was going to happen. And we told a lot of people over and over and over again, this is what we're going to do. It was like a year of telling people that we created a brochure that made it look like it was happening.
It made it real.
Here's these sessions. Here are the musicians who's coming.
Yep.
That's what Pete Townsend did with Tommy. He told people he had a rock opera. He's like, I hadn't written anything.
Right.
So I had to write it because I would be a liar if I,
Yeah. If anything, I have a degree in fake it till you make it. And that's my degree. Yeah. It's like, the persistence of just believing in yourself and having confidence. And it is not going to be so bad on the other end of it if you fall flat on your face that you're not going to be able to pick yourself back up. If you can't fail and pick yourself back up, then you should probably be in a safe place, in a safe job, and you should, find satisfaction in that however you can. But if you want to materialize and break out of the construct and break out of the story that somebody set up for you, you have to be willing to get hurt on the way.
Yeah, and do your own thing. But the other thing that I find is people always have a future, especially for younger people. It's, I want to be a veterinarian. I want to be a musician. It's always in the future. And if you want to be a veterinarian, there's one down the street. Why don't you just walk in and knock on the door and say, can I clean the cages? You know, like you got to just go do it, just go and put yourself out
before
there.
The industrial complex, that's what it was. It was a guild system. Someone did something. You went to that person. It's like the guy you talked about in the lab, Justin, showed you things, and that was the guild system. You asked questions and he would answer the questions for you. I think we're going to get back to that more and more because things are becoming more boutique.
The medical device, there's probably a point where before you got the job, you got referred in, that you were thought about it and you went and you sold yourself and you went and did it, and then you sat there and experimented and you just did it. The light thing, you thought about it, you told people you're going to do it. So you almost like projected yourself out to give yourself self-accountability.
Yeah.
And you did it. There's talking about it's fantastic, but is there something about just taking the first step and moving, right? Just doing it.
Absolutely. That is the antidote to anxiety, is doing.
Yeah.
If you're anxious, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you're thinking about some kind of problem, whatever it is, you get up as soon as you get up the next morning and start working on it, you realize our minds are assholes. You know what I mean? They create these big scenarios and they run around in circles the people need to realize that like the answer's not up there most of the time. The answer's out here. It's when you actually apply yourself to something that you actually get to resolve something.
Action as an antidote.
Going back to the action part, like when you told people, as you vocalized it, is there something about expressing the idea to someone else that helps generate further ideas and get you on the path of doing it?
Absolutely. Because the other thing, you get collaborators, people who want to be a part of it. People want to help you see your vision through.
Yep. Yeah. So if you keep it in your head and you think about it and you're afraid of never doing it or telling anyone about it, you won't do it. But the second you come out, put your stake in the ground and say, I'm going to start this festival. And at first it was going to be art, but then we saw the Light Festival. My stake was in the ground. Now we have to do it.
What people don't realize is that when you start talking about doing something, you tell enough people, you run into people who want to help you. The idea of like overcoming risk or overcoming challenges to help see a project through or start a project or start a company. The first thing that you have to do is you have to have faith in humanity, because none of these things happen on their own. And if you pay attention to the media, they're going to tell you that these people are terrible and these people are terrible and these people are terrible. The media today is a fear machine that is, designed to keep people scared and dumb.
So they stay in.
So
right?
they stay in.
Engage.
If you actually want to accomplish these kinds of things, you need to go out and enlist your community, the people around you. And you don't have to do anything to enlist them. All you got to do is talk to people and tell them what you're thinking, what
Yeah.
you're doing. If you talk to enough people, some of those people are going to help you out. Some of those people are going to have different ideologies than you do. Some of those people aren't going to agree with your lifestyle. Some of those people,
Well, they'll know people. They'll know
Yes.
people. Oh, you're doing that. I think I know someone that could help you.
I've had some pretty big setbacks, and I'm still here. The thing about the failure is once you go through a failure that is substantial and you come out on the other end of it and you realize, whoo, we can do that. It becomes easier to continue to take those risks.
Because if you plan for success, but if you do fail, you've already done it once, and it's not going to be the end of the day.
Right.
What
That's
were some of the things that happened when you went through a failure and you're like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to get through this? Is there something you could pinpoint? I don't know how I'm going to get to the other side. Because
I never had a situation that I didn't think that I was going to navigate, but I had some situations that were incredibly stressful. For instance, after Light City, we had a dispute with our collaborators on it that was very public. There was a lawsuit involved. We ended up winning the lawsuit, but we didn't make a big deal about it or anything. We just kind of quietly stepped aside. It was the front page of the Baltimore Sun. And the way that we found out about it was a reporter called us. They were like, what do you think of this lawsuit? We're like, lawsuit? What lawsuit? We had to lay off our entire staff except for one person. We had a 3,000 square foot office, a lease. We had
Scary.
one new child who was not yet 1 year old, one 2-year-old. The phone stopped ringing because people didn't want to be involved in the lawsuit. And we owed back taxes and bills started piling up, and I just started making phone calls and seeing where I could find work.
you were into action.
I got into action mode and started downsizing, started, minimizing costs. At one point, we were almost completely out of money, waiting on one really big contract. We had been battered, but we had this contract that was coming in. But the contract took like 8 months longer than we expected. It hadn't come through. And we were going through all of our reserves and are going through credit, and we were getting down.
How much and how far in debt were you at?
I want to say a couple $100,000 in debt.
Crazy. Most people will be like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
That's enough right there to cause a sleepless year. Forget about a sleepless night.
I would go for walks. I remember very clearly going for a walk and just wrestling with this anxiety. I was also drinking too much, but I was in this loop. I was in this very, really unhealthy loop of stress and alcohol. So that started. This was either before I started meditating heavily or right when I started meditating heavily. And as the money started coming in, more opportunities started coming in, and we were able to make some moves. And I don't even think it was within like 2 or 3 years that we paid the debt off after that. So it went from like having to shut down our entire office, and reconfigure our agency as a remote agency. And the festival was our baby. It was basically taken from us because of how valuable it was. Then they paid us, they settled with us to move along. But the silver lining is we went through that, paid off all of our debt, reorganized to be a remote agency, got a lot more freedom in my daily life, don't have to go to whatever. And then COVID happened, and the festival and the conferences fell apart. Thank God I don't own a conference going into COVID, because that would have sucked. Because if you didn't have cash reserves and whatever else, if you were relying on your income for that'd have been terrible. That negative experience fortified us for COVID. We were already set up remote. And then when COVID happened, it generated a lot more freedom for us because we didn't have to go to face-to-face meetings anymore. So all of these like negative things happening actually are setting up the foundation of a positive place to go to the next step. You know what I mean?
Amazing.
That is amazing.
There's a country song in here too, by the way. I just haven't figured it out. It's like God bless the broken road that led me to my current career, right? You know?
Yeah. Well, you don't see this thing. You can't see that, and if you can't if you don't get to fail or fall flat on your face or have something bad happen, you never get to see that side of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I did 5 years at a big corporation. I did 6 years at a startup. So I've been in like, the feedback loop of where is this going? Can I get a raise? Will I get the promotion? Will this happen? I've been there. What you're missing in that is you're missing having things go wrong and then the satisfaction from picking it back up again. I think people were meant to have big things happen in their life, not necessarily create light festivals, but people were meant to have to solve big problems, and overcome things. I think that we're engineered to do that, and it gives us a sense of accomplishment to be able to actually overcome and like pull things together. Most of
the satisfaction of looking back and being like, oh my God, I can't believe I survived that.
Yeah.
Or, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, on the successful side of that.
And maybe that's just me because I am a bit of an adrenaline junkie.
Is there something else that you'd like to tell someone that is contemplating a change in their life, maybe afraid of the risk?
I would recommend doing it. And if you fail, that was just a lesson that you had to learn. Like the universe is going to set you up with the lessons that you need to learn. If it wasn't a failure, it wasn't a problem, then you didn't need to learn it. But if you have an urge to do something, fear is not a good enough reason to not do something.
Great having you on here, Justin.
Thank you so
I've admired
much.
you for a long time. I'm just really excited that you were on our show. Looking forward to seeing the things that you create in the future.
Thank you. Me too.
Justin Allen is the Chief Operating Officer for What Works Studio. If you'd like to learn more about What Works, go to whatworksstudio.com. Our theme music was composed by Michael Leventhal, and today's episode is dedicated to the memory of Andy Rubin. You heard Justin talk positively about Andy Rubin's influence. Andy touched many, many lives, including my own. Andy gave me my first solo photo exhibition. We miss you, Andy. Thank you for the inspiration.